Hello again, everyone. Welcome. This is another invitation to wrap up those bountiful conversations and a reminder that we will have some more time for bountiful conversations toward the end. Thank you all again for joining us today. We're going to ask for some grace as folks are finding their way to their seats. Please do take your time, take care of yourselves. So good afternoon and welcome. Thank you to the Ford Foundation for hosting us today. My name is Kimberly Moore. I am a program officer with the New York Women's Foundation, and I support the fund that we're all here to talk about, the Fund for Girls, Young Women, and Gender-Expansive Young People of Color. Thank you all for your time and your presence today. Before we get started, I just wanted to acknowledge that we are joining you from the contemporary and ancestral homelands of the Munsee Lenape people, the Canarsie people, and the Wappinger people of Mannahatta. And the New York Women's Foundation is also located down the street from a sacred African burial ground. And part of why we want to start off in that way is that we understand this opportunity to come together as an opportunity for relationship building in the tradition of intergenerational relationship building in a way that really does center the voices and the experiences of young people in our community as people who host and hold so much knowledge that is so critical for getting us to a future that is liberated and transformational and equitable and inclusive for all people. And we are so grateful to have some of those folks whose experiences really do exemplify the way that the fund understands intergenerational relationships in the room with us. So before I pass it on to those folks, I would like to remind us all that we do have community members joining us on Zoom. And for our Zoom folks, I hope you can hear me. We do have folks monitoring the Zoom chat. So if you do have any accessibility needs or asks, please do uplift them. For folks in the room, I am going to ask my colleagues from the New York Women's Foundation to just put a hand in the air so that folks can identify you. Thank you, esteemed colleagues. So if folks who are not on our team have questions or asks around accessibility, know that those are the folks in the space who can support you with those needs or asks. We're going to have a really wonderful time together today. We're going to have a fireside chat. We're going to have a panel of funders and grantee partners. And we're going to also have some remarks from our leadership that are really going to take us through some reflection of phase one of the first 7 years of the fund, but also take us through the vision of phase two. And in the spirit of the fund and in the spirit of the land acknowledgement that started us off this afternoon, I would love to pass it on to one of the first voices of one of the younger members of our community, Chiara Del Vecchio, who is a member of our Grants Advisory Committee and was one of the voices who read through and joined in conversation with our grantee partners who are now in phase two of the fund. So Chiara, welcome to the stage.
Hi, everyone. I'm so honored to be here with you all today. Being in this room as a young Boricua New Yorker, I want to uplift and bring the spirit of my family, friends, ancestors, teachers, and comrades into this room with me. Thank you all for your wisdom and your support. Women and girls are multifaceted and dynamic, so like many of you, I wear many hats, some of which include organizer, advocate, creative. I'm part of a lineage and a community of radical shakers and movement makers, invested in the work of rallying with young people of color at the intersections of race, gender, health and wellness, and the arts, and it was an honor to serve on the 2023 Grants Advisory Committee for the Fund for Girls and Young Women of Color. The foundation has brought us all together to think more critically and lovingly about how we engage with one another as funders, grantee partners, and a larger community that supports girl and women-led solutions to our most pressing issues. Shifting away from traditional top-down hierarchical grant-making requires grant-makers to facilitate power sharing. The foundation has done this through participatory grant-making, which empowers community members like myself to have a say in how funding is distributed, ensuring that resources are allocated in a way that best meets the needs of the community. Grantees and communities provide necessary perspectives because those closest to a problem are best equipped to design and implement solutions. I'm in awe of the diverse professional and lived experience that was represented on this committee. Members of the GAC offered their time, dedication, and expertise in so many areas that were aligned with the work of potential grantee partners who in turn feel valued and empowered when they're represented at the funding decision-making table. This promotes equity, inclusion, and social justice. The funder-grantee relationship is an inherently unequal one that reinforces existing power dynamics. The foundation counteracts this dynamic in how it works with the committee and how it shows up for the community. The committee was oriented to the fund with organized, clear, and concise communication that was accessible to different abilities and learning styles, and the foundation allowed us to reflect and strategize on how to best meet the goals of the fund. It's an intentional process designed with care. Emphasizing collaboration, knowledge sharing, and trust ensures that community participants have true decision-making power and that the process respects their capacity and aligns with their values. The committee evaluated written proposals, thought critically about the glows and the grows that these organizations presented, and asked questions. As part of an anti-oppressive approach, we reframed questions to focus on an organization's strengths rather than its deficits. The foundation also seeks to establish and maintain an open and welcoming tone with prospective grantee partners throughout the application and review process, especially during site visits. Members of the GAC and the foundation staff were there to actively listen with deep curiosity and thoughtful engagement. Our work together was grounded in a set of shared values. One value is that philanthropy must follow the lead of people at the margins to support transformative change. There are many barriers, systemic and societal, that get in the way of girls and gender-expansive youth of color from fully thriving. That is compounded when existing at the intersection of multiple marginalized identities. Racial justice is crucial to securing gender and economic justice. Investing in Black and brown girls is valuable and on time right now. Early support and investment for developing grassroots organizations can leverage resources and momentum to enact meaningful change. It builds opportunities even more potently for youth to propel their leadership journey. Another value that was fundamental to ground and reflect on when meeting potential grantees is that women, cis and trans, and gender-expansive people are the authors of their own lives. Each and every organization brings an entirely diverse perspective and strategy to how they're tackling the issues impacting their respective communities. We saw a common thread that girls, gender-expansive people, families, and entire communities benefit from holistic approaches. Healing looks different for everyone, so we need a spectrum of innovative support services that at their core enable youth to tap into their existing power. Organizations led by and for young women and gender-expansive youth prioritize issues and topics that are of particular importance to young people, such as mental health. Creating youth leadership pipelines that align with their personal motivation drives projects that are often more flexible and adaptable, empower young people to develop leadership skills, increases their confidence, and makes a positive impact in their communities. This leads to long-lasting benefits for both the individuals involved and the broader society. The next generation of leaders gives us hope. At the same time, it's up to us to be intentional and to acknowledge the imbalance in decision-making power that young people hold in society. The ways we as a committee worked together were very reflective of how young people work together. It was collaborative, inclusive, and valued the diverse perspectives and experiences of all. I want to thank the Foundation Programs team for living these shared values day in and day out, and for their guidance and support as members of the committee had a huge task of making those final recommendations to the Board of Directors on which organizations should receive funding. Centering the voices and experiences of those most affected by social challenges and democratizing decision-making brings about greater transparency, accountability, and trust between funders and communities. When we talk about being rooted in gender, racial, and economic justice, what does this mean for funders in practice? Our most pressing issues cannot be resolved by investing in grant-making practices that reinforce the most harmful aspects of our economy. Participatory grant-making can help us build a more liberatory and inclusive world, one which is centered on all people's basic needs, safety and security for all, belonging for all, and valuing all contributions to society. A commitment to supporting transformative long-term work is not charity. It's solidarity centered on a radical vision of collective care. with solidarity from New York City to Palestine, Puerto Rico, the Congo, Haiti, Philippines, and all oppressed people worldwide.
Thank you, Kira. My heart is smiling. Thank you for your words. I am now going to pass it to two members of our foundational grantee partner, Girls for Gender Equity. Please help me in welcoming Aaliyah Thomas and Erica Chambers to the stage, who started their journey with GGE as interns. So, yeah.
Hello, everyone. We are proud to represent Girls for Gender Equity, whose sole focus is to center the voices of Black girls and gender nonconforming youth of color. Founded in 2001 by Joanne N. Smith, at GGE we center the voices of youth through programs, policy, and narrative shift. As mentioned, Erica and I both started as social work interns at GGE before transitioning into our current positions as Healing Justice Program Manager and Deputy Director of Healing Justice. My journey to working with young people started in undergrad, when my guidance counselor from junior high school reached out, asking me to be a mentor for her teenage daughter. I would spend time meeting with her several times a week at a local library in her neighborhood for hours at a time, providing guidance on things from homework and college applications to navigating conflict and strengthening relationships in her life. She always said her favorite part about our time together was having someone that listened to and understood her point of view. That experience inspired and essentially fostered my passion for working with young people, which is what keeps me grounded in the work I do day to day. Within GGE, I've had the opportunity to grow from intern to program facilitator and now Healing Justice Program Manager in just under 3 years. As youth-facing program leads, we have not just employed theories, but have put into practice youth-centering principles to ensure that young folks are equipped with the tools to advocate for themselves, their families, and broader communities. Uplifting and amplifying youth perspectives is a vital part to effecting meaningful, transformative change in spaces that traditionally do not create spaces for young people to have a say.
Hi, everyone. So we wanted to share a couple of ways in which we uplift, co-create, and provide space for young people to lead the work that we do. So GGE has been involved in the fund since its inception, and we are appreciative of the support we've received since 2015. This support has fueled our work in the Young Women's Initiative, led by Director of Programs and Impact, Alicia Liverpool-Brown. GGE fulfills the fund's mandate through our Young Women's Advisory Council. GGE's Civic Engagement Program for cis and trans girls, young women, and gender-expansive youth of color, by involving them in policymaking. This platform advances issues and campaigns that speak to their lived experiences. Direct feedback collected from our program participants has informed new policy proposals that were presented by Speaker Adrienne Adams' team, which culminated in the Speaker's commitment to call upon City Council members, along with Departments of Education and Health, yes, to address school climate, thank you, mental health, nutrition, and reproductive access issues that young people experience in New York City. The reinvigorated YWI, Young Women's Initiative 2.0, was mentioned by the Speaker during the most recent State of the City address. We also amplify youth voices in other spaces, in addition to the traditional policy advocacy work that we do. For example, Aaliyah and I used to run programming for Just Us, a demonstration project for systems-impacted young people, specifically girls and gender-expansive young people of color. Within Just Us, young people identify key social justice issues that they face and create advocacy and activism projects to address those issues. One of the projects that they created that we are so proud of was a Just Us zine. For that project, young people addressed issues that girls and gender-expansive youth of color face, including colorism, mental health issues, and school pushout. This digital zine was curated by their desire to bring awareness to these topics through storytelling, poetry, and ultimately a beautiful photo shoot that highlighted their own body positivity, Black girl magic, and self-expression. Projects like these provide spaces to heal in addition to amplifying youth voice. Another way in which we uplift youth voice and leadership is through our youth fellowship program that provides alumni from our programming with an opportunity to continue to develop their leadership skills, including curriculum development, creation, external speaking engagements, and community event coordination. For example, for the second year of her fellowship, our Sisters in Strength Fellow identified public speaking engagements as a professional development priority. And since then, we have been supporting her throughout the creation of conference proposals, presentations for those conferences, in addition to roundtables and panels that she's been able to speak at.
It is evident that there is no other investment more important than uplifting the voices of young people in a world that has historically left them out of spaces that directly impact their lives. Their lived experiences have value, and their voices deserve to be heard. This work is ongoing and must be sustained for the future to truly transform systems and empower youth to lead and effectuate change. At GGE, we are committed to supporting youth leaders and in amplifying their voices and look forward to partnering with you all in uplifting this work. Thank you.
Inhaling the experience and wisdom. Thank you so much, Aaliyah and Erica, for sharing your journeys and experiences with us and starting us off on this day. With the spirit that Kira, Erica, and Aaliyah shared with us, I am so happy now to transition us into our fireside chat, another opportunity for us to engage in some intentional storytelling of the fund, the foundation, and the movement for gender equity in the city at large. So it brings me great joy to introduce to you all Dr. Danielle Moss-Cox, member of the New York Women's Foundation Board of Directors. And to introduce Melissa Mark Viverito, who was a founding member of the Young Women's Initiative, I believe, with Girls for Gender Equity. So thank you both so much for being here with us. Yeah.
How's everybody doing? Isn't it just, at least from where I'm sitting, it feels just so amazing to be surrounded by so many advocates and laborers in this effort to liberate not only ourselves as women and gender-expansive people, but the entire world, right? When we are free, everybody is free. So thank you for that. So of course, Melissa, I have to brag on you just a little bit. Speaker Mark Viverito launched the Young Women's Initiative in 2015. Can I just say, I can't believe it's been almost 10 years. In partnership with community leaders Joanne Smith, Ana Oliveira, and myself. Shout out to us, Girl Power. YWI convened young women's service providers, city agencies, and everybody concerned with the lives of young women to address the unmet needs of young women of color, ages 12 to 24. So I want you to take us back to 2015 when Joanne first came to you to propose that the City Council throw its largesse and resources and brand, quite frankly, behind this effort. And I will say that somebody else said no. I'm not going to call no names. But if you know Joanne, you know she's tenacious. So what was it that made you say yes?
So, good afternoon. Buenas tardes, everybody. Look, I remember when I was asked by Anna, and you can never say no to Anna. It's a pleasure to be here. I was reflecting back, and I went back to like the press release when we announced it. But I remember very distinctly this coming up at one of those power breakfasts, the one that you throw annually, right? And it was like Joanne and you and others. But the conversation at that point was, well, Bloomberg, right, Obama had done My Brother's Keeper, right? And Bloomberg had done the Young Males Initiative. But, Joanne and you and others were like, well, where are the girls, right? Where are the women?
Hello?
Why are we not looking at that? And that right there kind of, piqued my interest. As a feminista, as someone who obviously has been an activist my whole life, I said yes, and understanding, right, that as women and women of color, the systemic injustices that are so deeply ingrained, right, in the way that we live each and every day, that we did need to. We want to talk about empowering young women. We have to also talk about the systemic prejudices and racism that exist, right? And then having young people, someone who is a very firm believer in participatory governance too. And I was one of the founders of participatory budgeting in the city council with 3 other colleagues. It was the idea of having young women meet, right, and talk about the challenges and what it takes to navigate this city, right, to live and survive in this city. And how can you give us, those of us that are in leadership positions and formulating policies and voting on budgets, right, what can we do to make your life, a successful one, and in one which you can fulfill the potential you have. So that to me kind of was like a no-brainer. It just really just spoke to me, for all the reasons that I just explained about how I live my life and what I believe in. And I said, you know what? It just makes sense that we facilitate, right? So we facilitate this by supporting it, right? And what's being called for by leaders who are living this and doing this work each and every day. So that kind of was like the genesis of it. And I was very, very just pleased to be in partnership with organizations and leaders that have such respect and have been doing such incredible work in the city. So yeah, that's kind of where we were.
Thank you. So I think it's also important to acknowledge that you didn't just suddenly go into politics, that actually your journey really started in the trenches, working in community, yes. In organizations like Aspira,
yes,
and really interacting with the folks on the ground. Can you talk about what some of the unmet needs were that you saw for women and girls of color in the city prior to even being in office?
I mean, look, you think about as someone who grew up in the feminist movement in Puerto Rico, right? My mother was an activist and was a leader in the feminist movement, and I was raised in that activism. And so, my mother and her generation, right, fighting, and me benefiting from those struggles. And look at where we are now, right? In a moment where we never thought that we would be so going back, right, to the back alleys and all that stuff, right? It's a horrific moment for young women as I look at you, right? We didn't want you to live this reality. My mother struggled and we struggled for you to not have to. And basically we're starting all over again, right? That struggle, right? So to me, it was just, the like you were saying when you were asking about access to education, access to healthcare services, right? The basics of what it takes to survive and how the patriarchy, because we live in a patriarchal system without a doubt. It continues to thrive, very much so. That was always creating these obstacles for us, right, to be able to succeed. Because the system is set up that way, one, but two, that the people that continue to lead us, predominantly men, continue to vote on budgets and enact policies that did not have our voices, right? We were not around those tables engaging in those conversations, and we were never asked, what does it take, right? Or how can we be a better society, right, if you're excluding half the population? So to me, that's why I believe very much in, as the young women introducing us to today, we're talking about that idea of, the people that are being impacted need to be the ones at the decision-making table, right? We have to nurture that. And so that kind of was what this is an example of that, because all the recommendations, right? And I was looking back on it and reflecting, right? We talked about in the, health, a whole set of recommendations, and economic and workforce development, right? We still, unfortunately, the lack of equity in pay is a reality, right? So we're still struggling for that. And in terms of education, anti-violence and criminal justice, these are all the areas in which very specific, solid recommendations were provided by people who were living those challenges, right? Well, this is how you can better support me, right? In terms of healthcare, access not only to reproductive health care, but basic health care. And for trans members of our community, right? Having gender affirming care. That is important. That came up in those conversations. So it wasn't me defining what that was. I was just using the power and the leverage I had to facilitate a space in which we could safely talk about those issues and challenges and get and elicit, the responses, elicit the demands, elicit the changes that we would need to implement to make that a better situation for all of you, right? So that to me was critical. So we were dealing with all those layers of injustice that continue to exist, and that we've gone back, because when we started this, obviously we were nowhere where we are now. And this 2.0 obviously has a whole new set of challenges to address, right? And so it's a different time, very, very drastically different time.
So I was really struck by the way government, community, and philanthropy came together. But I can tell you, having attended a lot of those conversations, that they weren't always easy, right? There were community organizers and activists face-to-face with the city agencies who sometimes were enacting the policies that felt like that's why we're here in the first place. So it got a little tense sometimes. But why did you think it was so important for community, philanthropy, and government to be in the same room?
No, I mean, that's the only way that we were gonna, right? We have to have these different levels coming together, right? But look, I think what this has also demonstrated is also the leadership, right? You have the leadership at your level in terms of running the organizations, right? Which was critically important, right? You have visionary, really, powerful leadership. Then you've got an Ana Oliveira, right, who is a leader in terms of access to resources, right? She has access to resources, a visionary, and saying, you know what, we're willing to put $10 million at the table if you put $10 million at the right, and then you have the elected leaders, right? You got to make sure that you're electing people that are also going to have that transformative, visionary look, right? It's not about the here and now. That's important, but also it's about the future, because this work is about the future. And then, creating opportunities now so that the next generation has it a little bit easier. So that coming together is critical, but it also is a challenge to all of you about what the importance of that. One of my mentors was Dr. Antonia Pantoja, who, if you don't know her, I would hope that you can study her a little bit. But she was a mentor to me because she was an institution builder. She came here from Puerto Rico with almost nothing, social worker by training, built a lot of important institutions within the Puerto Rican Latino community. And it was that visionary leadership about community development, economic development to build a better future, right? So that kind of got ingrained in me. But the importance of you all, right, playing a role in the electoral scene to make sure that you have people that have ethical leadership. And ethical leadership is to be able to see outside of yourself. That you have a commitment to the community, but also to the future. And that you have to pay it forward. She very much inspired me and very important in my life. And that to me is what all this represented, all of that coming together, right? The community-based leadership, the electoral leadership, the philanthropic leadership, and it shows the power that can be elicited when all that coming together. You can't do it individually, right? If each of those sectors tried to do something on its own, it wasn't going to be as successful as it coming together and being able to like say we have $20 million, like let's make this a reality, right? So I think that that's why it was important to kind of convene that and bring it together. Yeah.
I think for me, one of the things that really hit home was that liberation isn't free. I don't know why everybody thinks that the people who are doing the hardest work to advance transformation in communities should not only like be starving themselves, but also that their work should be under-resourced. And so just thinking about back to Anna, when you brought in all of those major corporate donors and foundations, JP Morgan Chase and Citi, and put them on the line to say, how much have you invested in young women and girls of color? And how are you willing to redistribute those resources to make sure that this isn't just lip service, right? So I thought that was also really important.
Yes.
You know, we live in a capitalist society, right? And we have to talk about the redistribution of wealth when we talk about generational wealth, which is a topic I despise. Because generational wealth is really about, I don't trust America to take care of my children or my children's children, so I'm going to try to stack the deck and my bank account to make sure that their basic needs are met. That's crazy, right? All right.
We were just talking about the issue of wealth just before we started, Anna and I, because it's like, sorry, we're kind of diverting a little bit, but maybe not so much, right? That it's just because this moment is just so difficult in so many ways, but that globally, right, the epidemic of that gap, the wealthier keep getting wealthier, and you know how much is enough, right? It's all based on extraction, right, on like oppression, the way that wealth is built and historically, right, and then it's a legacy. You know, as a colonized person, as I'm born and raised in Puerto Rico, we are a colony of the United States. Let's not forget that. You know, colonized people, right? We live in a reality where it's all about extraction, right? Because Puerto Rico had its thriving, agricultural sector, but then when you had the colonizers come in, right, and then we become viewed as a market and as a market as a consumer. You know, then we no longer produce. So 85% of our food is imported in Puerto Rico, right? Because now we are a market for it. So when you think about oppression and the reality that some of us as colonized people live, and the realities as as communities that have such vast experiences here, the issue of the systemic injustice is really critical that we talk about it constantly, and that we challenge, right, ourselves to build it differently. And it's to uproot it and to build a better future. I think that's what the, Young Women's Initiative represents, the 2.0 represents, and that it cannot be a one-off, right? You can't go, can't ask JP Morgan, okay, you're just going to give $25,000 this year and make yourself feel good, and then, hey, next year you forget about. No, this is about a long-term investment in the future of our city. And also, this thing had took off. I remember I was invited to the White House, right? That there was like this discussion amongst other women's foundations in other cities about modeling this across the country. So, right, so this is a model. And so we should be very proud here in New York of what's been built, because others now want to emulate it. And I just, I'm inspired that it continues to move forward in these different ways.
Just so important. What changes have you observed in the last decade related to the lives of women and girls? You talked a little bit about the desperate times that we're facing.
I think
now.
That, to me, that obviously is what sticks in my mind when I think of, about my mother and her generation and what they strive for, and what I was, when I was as an activist, and what we've committed ourselves to. But there's always the great stories within all of that, right? But the idea of having to create these abortion funds across the country, because, just the horror stories that you hear of what women are facing. And it really, I've cried on many occasions around these issues, because I just can't believe it. I really can't. I can't believe that we're here, And so it's hard to be a little bit optimistic. I still believe very strongly that even if Trump isn't elected, and there still is a possibility he can, let's not fall, that what he has unleashed, and it was always there, but it on steroids now, right? Like, between the courts and the stacking of the Supreme Court, and like what's been unleashed is something that we are going to be living with, for generations. And there's a lot of work. So I think I try to be inspired by some of the positive work that's happening, but it's hard not to be alarmist too, right? Because that is, we're at a different level than where we were 10 years ago when we did this first phase. So I have a hard time being completely optimistic, because I think that I feel it's so present that the threat, we've already are living it, but there's more to come, and there could be more to come. And that's a problem.
Certainly if we're not vigilant.
Right.
One thing I feel like oppression counts on is our collective exhaustion. It's just like, you freed the slaves, you gave them Reconstruction, now we're going to roll that all the way back to Jim Crow. So we've kind of seen this historically. Whenever there are meaningful social advances, the power structure really colludes to make sure that progress is not experienced.
Exactly that.
And that's why I think this community of folks in this room is so important, because I can get up and do the work because I know that wherever you are in whatever spaces you occupy, you're going to be doing the work. The fund was launched with the idea that we would invest for 21 years, an entire generation. What should we be thinking about as we look ahead for the next 10 years?
Oh, that's a good question.
Shout out to Camille.
Look, I know that I just was sitting next to Anna. Anna says that there's been a commitment for another 7. So we're still falling short 7 years. So, right. So I think that we had a speaker, myself, that initiated this. We have a speaker now, the first Black woman speaker, who committed, right, and it committed to another 7 years. Again, that issue of leadership, right, and what demands we make of leadership and expectations that we set for that leadership, I think is critical. So I think that, inserting ourselves in those conversations, this is not only the city council's responsibility, this is also, right, an administrative, and the mayor and the leadership in the administration also needs to embrace this, is to really figure out ways that maybe we can get all of you, right, that have been part of this process in some ways to serve as champions and as advocates to say, again, this is not a one-off, this is not just a short-term, this is about a deep commitment, right, to equality of 50% plus of our population, and we demand, right, that there is this long-term commitment. So I think advocating the administration, right, working with some of you all, making sure that the next, right, we're going to be going into another leadership race in terms of another speaker coming in, that commitment continues to be there. So I think serving as advocates to advocate for that is critical, because I think, as we've indicated, the long-term impact of this initiative, the fact that it's being replicated, we need to continue that movement here in the city for it to continue to have ripples in other places as well. So how do we then, young women that were part of that initial process, right, maybe becoming, and people being advocates and continuing to engage with funders, right? So that Ana Oliveira is not the only one talking to funders, right? But other people that have benefited, right, that participatory leadership style, people that have been part of this process to then serve as advocates, as spokespeople, right? And as movers and shakers. I think that's what I would say. I think our life has to be through the lens of constant activism and voicing ourselves, being vocal about the needs and what we demand. So, I mean, that's what I would say.
So I have one final question.
Yes.
How will you know when we have made progress? Like, what does progress look like to you?
I mean, look, the quickest way to do it, I mean, one of the things that we did, looking back at it, we set up the issue of like data. There was a committee that worked specifically on like metrics and data, because through data, you can, right, kind of like get a gauge of whether or not you've advanced, move forward, So I think the issue of looking at some of these metrics about the gender, right, the wage gap, that's real, right? You have not only the gap of women and men, but then you start, going into all like Latinas and African American women, right? And you start looking at the LGBTQ community, right? So you start looking at all of those disparities. And so when you start seeing progress is when you start seeing all of that lessening, right? And coming together and being minimized. But for me, it's also how we live in this society. Because again, we talk about, the systems and how embedded, right? When you have a foundation that was built on oppression and was built on prejudice and was built on racism, you have to take some drastic measures, right? To you either chop it down and build something new, right? That really reflects that collective vision you have of equality, right? Building something where everybody's voice, where you're all inclusive. It has to make you feel good, I guess, to some extent too. Feel that you're not threatened to speak up. You're going to be shut down, or you're going to be silenced, or you're going to be threatened, which is the world we're living in right now. We are physically being threatened for positions we take, for being women in a space. So those kinds of things, feeling less threatened, feeling safe. I don't feel safe, right? Many of us don't feel safe. So I think that there's an element of that, how we feel, but also you have to be able to measure it. And so being able to look at those metrics and figuring out how those disparities are being diminished. And we're not there.
I was thinking about my own answer to that question, and I've been a little distracted by the case in Park Slope where the twins were assaulted, one murdered, because she didn't want to follow him on Instagram. So for me, freedom is, I can tell a stranger, I don't want to follow you on Instagram and still go home to my family. Something so basic.
Yeah.
So with that, I want to thank you for this conversation and turn it over to our Vice President of Programs, Camille.
Please, one more round of applause for Dr. Danielle Moss-Cox, Speaker Melissa Mark Viverito. Thank you so much to both of you for your continued commitment to the New York Women's Foundation, your ongoing partnership. It has been almost 10 years. We said we would check in at 7 years, but COVID. Delayed, but in many ways right on time, because we are here together to really mark this moment of what we've been able to do in the first phase of the New York City Fund for Girls and Young Women of Color, but also to talk about what's ahead. So I'm so appreciative, and I want to just express great gratitude for that grounding of that conversation and reminding people of where we began, and still yet the challenges that are ahead of us, right? And so I always give credit to Anna for this generational change, right? We said to the board, 7 years at a time. 7 and 7 and 7 makes 21. So we're working our way there because we do want to be able to see that generational change. And what I think is so remarkable and I think so inspirational is that so many of our partners are still with us. Even if they move in different roles, in many ways, shape, and form, they are still with us, walking together with us, and knowing that this can only go as far as we can take each other. So I'm so grateful for that and always want to share the gratitude that's there. So I get to give a little bit more of an overview of the fund and also get a chance to go over the reflections, the impact that we had in talking with our grantee partners, them sharing what they were learning from their community, the girls and young women and gender-expansive youth of color that they were working with, to talk about what was the New York City Fund able to accomplish, and yet what's still ahead. So I always think it's important to start with a statistic that never really changes, right? Despite our best efforts at the New York Women's Foundation, which is that only 2% of philanthropic funding in the United States is targeted to women and girls of color. I've said that statistic many, many times over the years, and yet it's the one thing that just doesn't budge very much. So we want to see that change. And I think, again, with this fund, this bringing together this collective of philanthropic institutions to say, we can go as far as we can go together, is our first step towards doing that. So the New York City Fund for Girls and Women of Color, a collaborative effort, right? So as we heard, there was the Young Women's Initiative. We, as the philanthropic partner at that table, wanted to galvanize other funders to join us, the New York Women's Foundation, who since 1987 had always seen girls and women of color as a priority, but wanted others who, despite whatever their strategic priorities were, whether it's economic security, safety, civic engagement, know that they have to also center girls and young women of color in order to even advance those strategic priorities and goals. So we invited a diverse group of philanthropic funders to join us to promote that progress for young women of color. We were joined, and we were particularly happy to support and follow the lead of folks like Dr. Danielle Moss-Cox, Joanne Smith, who knew the direction that we needed to go so we can take those dollars and put it towards it. The first of its kind in the United States, the fund envisioned a city that offered every opportunity for all girls and young women of color, inclusive of two-spirited, transgender, and gender nonconforming youth. It was a pool of dollars, right, that we brought together to invest in nonprofits promoting the well-being, but also the leadership of young women. I think we heard from Kiara where we talked about our participatory grant-making process, where it's not just a bunch of us adults saying, okay, good, we know where the money should go and put it there, but really looking at the recommendations that came from the Young Women's Advisory Council, which still exists today, housed at GGE, where they gave, as Speaker Melissa Mark Viverito mentioned, a series of recommendations for us to advance, to prioritize in our grant-making strategies and moving that forward, with the goal of shifting philanthropic practices. For many of those funders at the table, participatory grant-making was not something that they did. It was a small group of people sitting around, or perhaps even just one program officer who decided where millions of dollars would go and determined whether or not that meant to girls and women of color. So being at that collaborative table was an opportunity for not only them to shift these dollars, but also for them to learn new practices, ways of engaging and centering and following the lead of girls and women of color, which we're so proud to be able to promote and continue to do today. So the first phase of the fund invested in local leadership. It directed philanthropic resources to underinvested organizations by and for young women and gender-expansive youth of color. And when I do talk about phase two, which is where we're moving into today, you'll hear also that many of those groups that we are funding now are also now led by folks who were participants or interns who came and were experiencing many of these programs, were part of the advocacy, the movements that were moving forward, and now are in roles of leadership that we, again, feel extremely proud to be a part of and continue to support. It has offered meaningful and holistic support to organizations and programs led by and for young women and gender-expansive youth of color. And to date, the fund has distributed close to $17 million to girls and young women of color-led organizations. So I want to move on to the reflections on the impact of the findings. So what did we discover through evaluation? We need metrics, right? We need to know what worked. We saw an increase in economic security and opportunities for young women of color. We saw increased funding opportunities for programs led by and for young women of color. I should note that so many of the groups that we fund are small grassroots organizations. Oftentimes, we are one of their first institutional funders. We were able to fund them with a fund that had at its maximum 16, 17 funders at the table who were being exposed to these groups for the first time, many of which were then continuing to fund them on their own outside of the collaborative fund. It was a fund that centered youth voices in advocacy and policy-making spaces. It supported girls and young women of color to improve mental health outcomes, which you'll hear more about in phase 2 is still something that is needed, and we will continue to support in phase 2. Next slide. So our learnings from a big, bold, and revolutionary fund, in the next slide, you'll see that the takeaways and the best practices that I think, again, have been so much a part of and ingrained in the values of the New York Women's Foundation are now influencing an entire swath of other funders who are taking on roles of, and you'll hear this a lot lately in philanthropy, trust-based relationships, right? It seems so simple to trust what people are telling you about their lived experiences, to trust that they know their communities, to trust that they have the solutions that are ingrained and embedded in their community. That is something that we espouse and that other foundations have continued to follow, and you'll hear that language a lot these days in the philanthropic community as crucial for transformational work. We heard from our funders that grant making had a greater impact if supported with additional resources, right? So yes, we were able to fund many of the organizations as part of the New York Women's Foundation, but how powerful was it to fund these groups alongside other funders who, again, had never funded these groups before? Also to complement what the City Council was doing as well, to shift dollars, again, to girls and young women of color. We also saw narrative shift as having individual, community, and systems impact. One of the things that we found so powerful is the narrative around what we need to do for girls shifted. But is what do girls and women of color want to do for themselves? How do they want to lead? What are the solutions that they've identified? How do they want to move it forward? And young women running organizations, running programs, leading movements are seen as the folks who will take us to the next station and next direction, the next future that holds. And ultimately, clear and consistent communication enables strong alignment and sustainable relationships among members of the fund. What we were able to do with the fund was not just, sit around and put money together and then go on our way, but we really held a lot of space together as funders to know that it was a place for folks to learn, to engage each other, to think about how we can shift practices, to strengthen those practices, to center the folks with lived experiences that those dollars would be going towards. And we saw that transformation with other funders as well. Next slide. So the challenges. So I already mentioned the good old pandemic. The lingering pandemic, although it's been 4 years, it is still something that I think in so many communities and for so many people, and particularly for young people, has shaped them and shaped their experiences and shaped their communities. We've seen it even shape the funding landscape, shifting the ways we work, creating barriers for people to be in community with one another. And so that is something that is still a question of how we can continue to support folks who've been so deeply impacted by that pandemic. Sociopolitical trends creating the need for rapid response work versus long-term strategy development. So I think so many of the groups that we have funded have great long-term vision about what's ahead, but so much is coming at us. I mean, this year alone, we know that this national election, and as we call it in our meetings, Scenario A and Scenario B, that's the easiest, cleanest way we can talk about it. So Scenario A and Scenario B. Thinking through what the implications of that are. In 2016, it was so transformative for many groups, and in a way that we saw doors close, we saw leaders leave, we saw young people transformed in a way of what's next for us, where is this country going, what is ahead for me. And so wanting to be ready for the moment, right, and being able to respond, but also know that folks need time and space to think and vision and create that future for themselves, and that requires investments in long-term strategy and planning. And although funding sources were also scarce during the past few years, we see that and how it has impacted general operating support. I cannot say this enough, that for small grassroots, any organization, but particularly for small grassroots organizations, you need the money for the work, you need the money for the staff, you need the money for the lights, you need it all. And so to encourage, to support, to promote that this is the way forward, to invest fully and holistically within organizations. And we also saw that challenges and lessons around staff burnout and turnover. So many things have happened in the close to 10 years that this fund has been in operation and moving forward, and we have seen that change leaders forever. In some ways, we've seen the rise of other young people coming to positions of leadership, but so many incredible leaders that we have lost from burnout and turnover because they just could not move that work forward, or they could not in balancing that with their lives. So those are things that we want to continue to address and support and invest in phase 2 of this fund. Next slide. So what is our call to action to funders? You'll hear more of this from the panel that I'll introduce shortly. But we want to continue to engage with collaborative funds. Again, there is work that we can continue to do together to put these dollars together to accelerate resource distribution to the community. We need to continue to center and trust voices of community. That should be the mantra, the value system that we all hold as funders. Focusing on improved mental health outcomes. We've heard from so many of our grantee partner leaders, the communities that they serve, other funders, that mental health needs are still a priority, and we should continue to center that. We need to continue to invest in groups that are run by and for young women and gender-expansive youth of color. We will do that. We hope you will join us. And we need to promote clear communication among stakeholders and address staff turnover to enable long-lasting relationships. So we need to invest in leadership development. We need to invest in organizational sustainability. The resources need to be there to hold groups to be able to grow, sustain, and move forward. And we need to invest in more powerful convening spaces. I must say, it's wonderful to have us all together today. And so we need more of these spaces to be together, to be in conversation, to be in partnership with each other to move the work forward. So we see that as the vision for phase 2 and moving that ahead. So moving forward into phase 2, which we had a cycle at the end of December of last year, we want to get to that 21-year mark. We're excited about the groups, and we do have a slide which we can show in a little bit. But the fund is still focused on systemic issues, and particularly those that lead to the negative impacts around folks' mental health and emotional well-being of girls, young women, and gender-expansive youth of color. And this fund, as was noted in the fireside chat, is one of quite a few across the country. We are part of and are one of the leaders of and one of the founders of the National Philanthropic Collaborative of Young Women's Initiatives. So there are other women's foundations around the country that have joined us in their own way, created their own homegrown approach to investing in girls and young women of color, have created partnerships with government and community to do that and move that forward, but there is still more to do. And so we are excited about the work ahead. And I would love to introduce some of the grantee partners that will be in conversation to talk a little bit about their experience with the fund, as well as a funder who also has been on the journey with us as well, and how they have seen the last few years and reflected on that. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Beryl Ford of Vibe Theater Experience to join us. Simone Jingor of Jahaji Sisters. And Mariama Diallo of the Ford Foundation.
Hello. I don't think so.
I don't think they're on.
I hear you. Oh, yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, perfect.
I think it's on.
Yeah, it's on. So I'd love for everybody just to take a moment to introduce yourself and how you became connected to the fund. So Mariama, would you like to start?
Sure. Hello and welcome, everyone. I hope you all have been received well at the foundation. My name is Mariama Diallo. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a program associate here at the Ford Foundation. I'm on the Gender, Racial, Ethnic Justice U.S. team, which is a bit of a misnomer. We have 3 areas of work: a reproductive justice line of work, a community public safety line of work that's redefining the way that communities define solutions to safety that are not involved in carceral systems, and an immigrant rights line of work. We also are co-housing a more nascent racial justice initiative. And before continue, I just wanted to say some thank yous. Thank you for the beautiful grounding, Kiara. I would be remiss to, not thank all of the work that, went into supporting this event from the New York Women's Foundation, and my colleagues here at Ford, the AV team, the catering team, the facilities and events. So much gratitude, and thank you so much for offering me this time.
Peace, everyone. My name is Simone Davy Jingor. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a co-founder of Jahaji Sisters and now serve as a co-director along with Shavana Jorwar. And I came to the fund as a grantee partner in 2018 was when the RFP opened up and we applied, and then we got funded. We were really lucky to get funded in 2019, and it definitely made a huge impact in terms of our own growth and changed the trajectory of our work. So just a lot of gratitude.
Hi, everyone. My name is Beryl Brianne Ford, not affiliated with this foundation. And I'm the co-executive director of Vibe Theater Experience, along with my co-director, sister friend, Micheline Lemonnier. Vibe is a Brooklyn-based nonprofit organization that works with girls, young women, and gender-expansive youth 13 through 26 in New York City and across the country. And we too joined the fund in 2018 and have greatly benefited from its generous capacity building initiatives and support over the last 4 years.
Simone and Beryl, maybe you can talk a little bit about what your experience has been and was in the cohort in the first phase.
Yeah, for sure. I didn't get to say what Jahaji is, but we're a gender justice organization that's activating Indo-Caribbeans in New York City to end intimate partner, family, and sexual violence. And what we're doing is we're supporting survivors, girls, women, gender-expansive folks who've been directly impacted and are vulnerable to gender-based violence. We support them to heal and to create lasting change. And we're doing that through arts activism, leadership development, and grassroots organizing. And like I mentioned, being a part of the first cohort was just game-changing for Jahaji Sisters. I mean, we started out as a scrappy grassroots organization that probably had a budget of under $50,000. We were all volunteer-run, and having the investment of the fund actually allowed us to build our infrastructure, to grow our capacity, to move from being a volunteer-run organization for many, many years to one that was staffed. Myself and Shavana were able to step into co-director roles, and now we're like an organization of 5 full-time staff, which I do not take lightly. And and the other thing I had to say is the multi-year investment is really what made the difference. It wasn't just a one-time grant. It was investment over several years that allowed us to be able to step into our our full potential as an organization that's doing frontline work in our community, right? There's actually no other groups that are doing what we're doing. We're the first in the country, and that's a lot of pressure. And it means that you're always looking to how you can resource the work. So the trust-based piece of having a funder who sees that you're serving a marginalized and underserved community in New York City. We're actually the 3rd largest immigrant group in Queens as Indo-Caribbeans, but folks still don't know who we are. But to receive this investment actually made us feel seen. And it allowed us to connect with so many other grantee partners that are doing phenomenal work that we were able to build with and learn from. And also the capacity building support, having access to that to be able to be really intentional about, I mean, oftentimes when you're doing this work and you're on the front lines, it's like it is very much so about responding to crisis after crisis, but having intentional time to come together with other grantee partners, receiving capacity building support gives you time to be reflective. Okay, what kind of organization are we building? What's the culture we're creating here? How do we want to continue to be intentional about our growth? And I feel like those were the kinds of access that we got from being a part of this cohort.
That was such a wonderful answer. And I would say that at Vibe, we've had a similar experience. So our organization is over 20 years old, but it's still grassroots. And we only have right now, for example, 2 full-time staff, me and Mimi, and we have our program alum who are now contracted, and that's made possible through investments from the fund. We were able to really think about what a shared leadership model looks like. Me and Mimi joined Vibe in these positions when we were both 25 and 26. So really embodying what youth-centered leadership means and saying that we trust our young people to lead, that we have the experiential embodied knowledge to lead an organization, to support the youth that we serve, to tell their lived experiences through storytelling. We advance our mission every day through 3 core programming initiatives. So performing arts education that happens on site in our downtown Brooklyn location. We also work in partnership with community organizations and other cultural organizations. And we also work in schools directly throughout the 5 boroughs. And then we have our wellness initiatives, which provide free mental health literacy programs to young people that we serve and also our staff. And then we also do our transformational leadership and youth workforce development programs. So all of these things are possible because of investments from the fund. We've really been able to think about what the next 20 years will look like for our organization because we've had that sustained commitment, and it's just been really wonderful.
Excellent. Mariama, thank you. So talk to us a little bit about your experience as a funder at the collaborative table. What has that been like? And, you know, thinking about any other funder engagement experiences you have, if there are differences or what you'd want to highlight or amplify about the collaborative table that we have.
Yeah, I made a bit of a face because technically I'm not a grant maker, but they do know that I'll provide some context. I started at the foundation in October of 2018 as a program assistant, and it was my introduction to philanthropy. And immediately I started to represent the foundation at the GUYWOC table. And what a godsend, honestly, for the spirit of trust-based philanthropy, the spirit of young folks and femmes of color leading not only in defining what programmatic opportunities or programmatic initiatives were happening at their organizations, but define how the money moved was really key. And then there was an expertise at the fund that, you know, folks who are from the very organizations that they're funding are now dictating, you know, how this fund will engage. I think that was revolutionary, honestly, and that became a very clear distinction immediately. So I'll say that I'm always shouting out the staff at New York Women's Foundation because I genuinely do believe that they operate in a way that just enables folks to show up, be really clear about, you know, not only do we want to be resourced for the day-to-day, really grimy, hard work that happens on the ground, but we want to be sustained so that we can develop the visions for the future that will sustain us so that we have liberatory futures. I think that's key. So doing both is such a challenge, and it's really honestly a privilege to be a partner of the fund. I'll say as a grantee partner, or rather a funding partner to the fund, also having that space where they're also informing and doing a lot of donor education to their funders at that table, right? These are funders oftentimes who have national views. They are thinking about, you know, other, you know, areas of work, but just to understand that gender justice is implicit in whatever you're funding. It should be informing your solutions to climate change. It should be informing the way that you do disability justice work. It's really key. So that funder education it's a huge, huge resource that they're also providing to us. So it's it's a even exchange, honestly. We get a lot out of it, I think. And then finally, but definitely not last, is the grantee partners who are so generous with their time. At the quarterly, funder meetings, oftentimes at the beginning, it will start with this grounding, just where grantee partners will share what they're working on. They come, they share, their grant activities, they share, what their hopes are for the future, what challenges are coming up for them. And it's a diversity of organizations, right? There are trans leaders at these spaces. There are disability justice organizations. There are cultural workers. And again, I think it's key for funders to be exposed and see that there's a diversity of organizations that you can be funding, and it should not stop at, gender or women or femmes or trans folks are not in my portfolio. It's key to whatever you're funding. So I think that it has been, again, revolutionary. I think at Ford, we strive for all of our portfolios to be incredibly expansive and diverse. And there's a challenge with oftentimes having one program officer, hold a portfolio that is supposed to be reflective of the multiple strategies, the multiple communities that fall under these areas of work. So I think with funding intermediaries like IWOC or the New York Women's Foundation, which, Ford funds multiple tables at New York Women's Foundation, I think it's key. And again, just resourcing the leadership of the staff programmatic at New York Women's Foundation, and just, doubling down on our resources. Our resources stretch farther as a result of that. It's not to say that we should not take the responsibility to fund these organizations directly. It looks different if Ford Foundation is one of your grantee partners on that list that folks see. So it's not to, shun us from that responsibility, but I think we have seen our resources go much, much farther and have an impact in doing this work in community. So I think those are some key differences that come to mind.
Thank you, Mariama.
Of course.
So Beryl, I'd love for you to talk about this new vision, or this vision that is being moved forward with phase 2, right? Supporting the mental health of girls and women of color. How do you see that vision aligned with your work and what's ahead?
So at Vibe, we start with a vision of supporting mental health by thinking about our organization as operating as a third space. So it's a space that exists outside of the home and school environments where young people navigate through daily. And because of that, we strive to create safer alternative spaces through our programs for our young people, because the youth populations that we work with, they're particularly vulnerable to adultification bias and other gender-based harm, and they also experience disproportionately higher academic discipline and push-out trends. And we also know that these unique stressors are compounded by the intersection of race and gender and lead to higher rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide in girls, women, and gender-expansive youth. And this is unequivocally true of these populations that we serve at our organization. Studies from the field show that youth populations experiencing these types of realities receive mental health treatment at less than 1/3 of their rate of their white peers in similar circumstances. While we're an arts organization first, we deeply understand that art alone can't just do the work. It doesn't contribute to making people and communities more whole. So at Vibe, our wellness program, which started in 2019, so even before the pandemic, we started thinking about these things. It exists to break down barriers to participation, to heal collectively the relationship between mental health providers for the young people that we work with. And it's done through a liberatory lens. It's done through a healing justice lens. It's done in a way that uplifts the performing arts as a tool to shift narrative, which is really exciting. And we're really excited about phase 2 because we're able to amplify the work that we're doing in partnership with Liberation-Based Therapy, which is a psychotherapy group based in New York that's founded by Tanisha Christie. We're able to offer more free therapy to our young people, including our staff. We're able to facilitate conversations that are organized by our young people that are discussing the most pressing issues that they think are relevant, especially as it comes to mental health. And we're also really excited with funding in phase 2 to start this new initiative called the Vibe Be Well programming guide. So it's a digital resource that will provide mental health literacy resources, and have an in-person component, which extends the work that we've already been doing for the last 3 years. And we're excited to be funded in phase 2. This joins our work in partnership with the L'Oreal Tish Illumination Fund, Grantmakers for Girls of Color, and the North Star Fund.
Thank you. Simone, can you talk about your work at Jahaji and also how it's centering mental health and emotional well-being for young people?
Yeah, at the core of our work, Jahaji has always been a healing and political home for survivors, and really supporting them to step into their full power to become feminist change makers. And healing is such a huge part of that. In all of our programming, we bring in a healing justice lens where we're supporting young people to move through a very deep transformative process where they're understanding that their leadership is also tied to them being whole and being well, right? I grew up, being mentored by so many women of color who I saw burn out. I saw many of them lose their lives. They're not here anymore. And I just don't want to replicate that in how we're doing this work. So it's like, how do we disrupt those cycles? And it's supporting young people and young women and gender-expansive youth to understand that we got to do this for the long haul. Like, we want to be sustainable as we do this work. So our whole model of how we're building feminist leadership goes hand in hand with the healing work of how we're bringing young people together to be in community, to go through a retreat together in upstate New York where they're understanding what generational trauma is, how we as people who've come from colonialism and indentureship have been impacted, and how that still plays out in our community today, and really giving them the space to be fully self-expressed and to use art as a way that they're speaking their truth to power, using poetry, and really centering the healing first, and then coupling that with the leadership development and, the work around how do you become an organizer? How do you understand the way different oppressions are impacting your life and your community? And having the hard conversations too. Another thing about Jahaji that I feel makes us really special is that we're multi-generational. So as much as we've been centering young people and they've always been the driving force around how we do our work, young people they're on our board, they're on our staff, they're a part of our membership as member leaders. It's like they're also sometimes in spaces where they have to engage in really hard conversations with our elders, the aunties who have just come here from Guyana and Trinidad. They're new immigrants. They don't understand what gender pronouns are, like really small, simple things that can feel harmful. So like as we're bringing these two groups together, the young folks and the older folks, who are then having these rich cultural exchanges around how they can actually see and hear each other. It gets hard, it gets complicated, but it's also healing, and like we've had moments of our work where it's just been youth centered alone, where we have our arts and cultural work, for example, where we're bringing young people together. I think another thing that's really hard is, as an immigrant community and being a young person, you're like negotiating so much, right? Your family just came here from another country and they are putting these pressures and these expectations on you. But you're growing up in New York City, in an urban landscape where you love hip hop culture, and there's all these other things coming into play in terms of how you see yourself. And it's like, how do you negotiate this idea of being Indo-Caribbean American, being able to have a foot in both those worlds? It's hard. So like, I feel like for our arts and culture work, it's about supporting them to understand their history, supporting them to understand how to build that strong sense of like identity. And then the other hard part is like a lot of our young folks are growing up in households where gender-based violence is present. They've either been directly impacted as survivors of sexual violence, or they've witnessed their parents and their siblings going through it. And so like through the second cohort that we're now part of with the fund, we've been able to establish survivor support groups, because we also noticed that, yeah, we're all about organizing and movement building, but we have to also meet young people where they're at and fully address the mental health pieces that they're grappling with. You know, they're coming out of the pandemic and they're dealing with real like self-esteem issues. Like they're getting bullied on social media. They're going through like depression. Like there's just so many things that they're grappling with. And it's like, how do we bring them together in a supportive space to be able to understand how to work through that trauma with like a mental health professional, and that being like another key layer of the work that we do to support them in their healing and wellness journey.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Mariam, I would like to ask you, as you know, we have a participatory grant-making process for the fund. What did it mean to you and to Ford and to funders at the table, because you've been at the collaborative table spaces, to have young people be centered in the grant-making process?
Yeah, again, I thought it was revolutionary, and it started from day one. Early on, I was a part of the participatory, peer reviewer process where we're receiving the proposal, which was generous. I should say, I am a young person from New York. I experience, the intersections of a lot of lived marginalized realities, child of migrants. My folks are undocumented. My mom has a really serious mental health disability. Siblings, who've experienced contact with the criminal justice system. So, and I kind of missed out on this wave of services and programming to sort of be in a space like Ford, right? And then, to have this soft and gentle holding with the New York Women's Foundation and to be in that space, to see that, one of the questions on that forum was, how are young people informing your program, right? How, and it, sometimes in philanthropy you get so used to the representation politics or the tokenization of folks, of who are represented on a board, who's an ED member, and who's in some position of leadership. But to be asked that question and to be, genuinely have to interrogate that, I think it shows so clearly, again, in the work that you all are leading. So I think it was immediately clear that we should be resourcing the expertise and the lived experiences of young folks of color, young women and trans folks, right? So, and I think we then, those learnings could not stay with us. They had to go back into our institutions, right? So how did I then come from those meetings and then transform and share those learnings with the program officers who were then moving those dollars, right? And just being clear that when we had conversations about which organizations will we fund? How do we, integrate disability and gender and racial justice into our lines of work? Just making it clear that saying, Jaharji, well, they're doing all those things right now, right? You should be resourcing them and making it very clear that it's not a challenge. These organizations are here. They're in our backyard. We should be funding and resourcing them. We don't have to be looking to the large national organizations. There's a responsibility to be resourcing our organizations locally. So I think those were like immediate things that came to mind and are still practices to this day. Again, as you know, I think that practice of sharing our learnings to larger programmatic staff have had incredible effects. We made sure that during the pandemic, that New York Women's Foundation received general operating support to continue doing this work, right? And that we're still fighting. That's shout out to y'all for being generous, with, again, and they always, are so generous, again, with their time and continuously in these really thoughtful ways, preparing these decks, sharing the evaluations and reports in really accessible ways. So yeah, I think, again, it's a privilege, honestly, for us to be partners of the fund and to be constantly learning from the partners of the fund. So yeah.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask one last question before we open it up for Q&A. And I'm going to take license from Danielle's question because I really like that question of what does progress look like for you? So if we were to come to that 21-year mark, and you've been resourced and funded by the fund and perhaps so many others, or continuing to advocate for this work in funder spaces, what does progress look like for you? So I know that was a curveball, so whoever would like to answer first.
I can go. Actually, so I'm preparing for the other question that you gave to us. I asked my staff, to respond, and I have two answers that I think go really well for that question. So the first being progress would look like youth-led advisory councils that should be established to empower young people, fostering a sense of agency, autonomy, and leadership. Their voices are essential in shaping policies and initiatives that directly impact their lives, and their involvement ensures a more equitable and inclusive society. And that is a testimony from our operations assistant, Kayla Lewis, who is also a former program alum of VIBE. And she also had to say progress then would look like participatory grant making, continuing that. It should be encouraged to enhance transparency, equity, and accountability in resource allocation. By involving young people in decision-making processes, the fund can empower them to actively collaborate on projects that affect them directly or indirectly, fostering a sense of ownership and investments in their communities.
I love it. So you were ready for the curveball question. Simone.
I'm like really sitting with this question. What does progress look like in 20 years? I mean, one, Indo-Caribbeans would be on the map. Like every single person in New York City would know who we are. And they wouldn't have to ask, okay, well, I don't understand. Like you look Asian, but you're West Indian, you love soca. Like what does all that mean? It would just be understood. And I think the second piece is we have lost a lot of young Indo-Caribbean people to gender-based violence in our community. Most recently, it was Diana Ramjak, who, sorry, trigger warning, who was shot on the same street that she lived on with her two children at home and her mom. And it was by the ex-abusive partner that she was trying to get out of the situation with. So I think progress would be a complete cultural shift in our community. I know that's going to take a lot of work, but helping our community to understand that we truly have to uproot these traditional patriarchal norms that have been in our culture for generations that really have been passed down from like our great grandparents to us, you know, to believe that we have to uphold a certain way of being. And I feel like that cultural shift is really embodying new ways of being where girls and women and gender expansive folks are actually safe. They're thriving. They're not surviving. They're thriving and they're flourishing, and they can actually be their full authentic selves and not have to worry about what that looks like when they walk through their neighborhood and the world. And I feel like the other piece of it, too, is Jahaji is going to become a household name in our community. It's taken a lot of work to get to where we are now, but everyone in our community will know, okay, this is the place that we have to go, that we can send our young people for wraparound services and to learn how to organize and change the world. And our staff will grow. Like we are a team of 5, but I hope we can be like even much bigger so that we can scale up our work. We've been getting requests from other cities in the country where there's large Indo-Caribbean communities like Orlando, Florida, and like Minneapolis. Like, can there be a Jahaji Sisters here? And we're like, well, we're really focused on doing work in New York City, but maybe in 20 years we could have Jahaji chapters in other Indo-Caribbean communities in the U.S.
I want to live in y'all's world, and I can't wait for that vision to happen. I hope that, and I say this as someone who works at a foundation that is privately endowed in perpetuity, with the hope that it's done in perpetuity, that a lot of these investments don't happen this way, that philanthropy doesn't exist in this model, that, you know, our governments can just resource and support us in all of our lived realities without, you know, going to one space to get this. And, you know, I want to get all of my economic, social, cultural needs addressed by my government. And I don't have to go through private, you know, resources to get that. And that's not to downplay the incredible work that, you know, New York Women's Foundation does. It's just such a shame that, you know, this is the model and that there's partners like Ford who have to, you know, or who are, that these resources are just not publicly available, right? I'm really optimistic by young people. I'm really, really optimistic about that. I genuinely mean that. It's what sparks me, what's moved me. their effortless like leadership, their ability to do it with a sense of humor in such a really challenging time, they make it look easy. I mean, the walkouts that we've witnessed in the past 5 months with the ongoing genocide in Palestine, I mean, just the seamless organizing around climate justice, it's brilliant. And their ability to talk about all things without, feeling like anyone is excluded, young trans leadership also, being resourced. I hope that that wave and their ability just to show how seamless this can be done and be resourced for it, like it is hard work. I hope we're at a place where they're not questioned, that young people are always resourced and held beautifully. So yeah, again, I thank you all for modeling that so well. And I hope that as funding partners that we're respecting and honoring and resourcing that leadership as well.
Thank you, Mariama. So I'm looking to the audience. If there are questions, I'd love to hear them, or even just you want to give kudos or uplift the folks who are here, you're welcome to do that as well. But we have a few minutes for that, so I'd love to make space for that.
Thank you so much. I'm Jody Weiss with Chloe Capital. Just an incredible conversation. I was curious now for the second part of your goals. Are you then doing outreach for philanthropic dollars to other foundations? How are you raising the next stage of capital? Thank you.
Excellent question. Where's my colleague, Devika? Is she here? Okay, she's probably making new friends, funder friends. We are always looking to expand our funder table. It's so incredibly important that we have new folks that come join us. There are clearly many organizations who need to be resourced at a higher level. We'd love to give larger grants, multi-year grants, additional support for capacity building, have more convenings such as this. So we will always make room for new funder friends. So please do talk to us afterwards, because we always are looking for that and growing that table.
I'm so sorry, just to quickly add, just because you said convening spaces, please feel free to use Ford as a convening space. The center is meant for, any allied organizations or movement organizations to use the space as a convening space. So I think there's an online form that you fill out, and they try to do their best to meet the demand. But just wanted to add that because that was one of the call to actions.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Other thoughts, questions? We have a hand here. Oh, follow.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having us join you guys today. I just want to say, as a former grantee of the New York Women's Foundation, the New York Women's Foundation was the first foundation that gave us a grant, a little piece of light. And because of that grant, at the height of the pandemic, we started during the pandemic, we were able to provide our community inside and outside with protective things like masks, gloves, things like that, food. I mean, prisons had stopped getting food delivered to them. There were pregnant women that we had. We were getting pregnant women out because of the support of the New York Women's Foundation. So I just want to say how really important it is for grassroots organizations to have the support of the New York Women's Foundation, but others as well, because we can't do it without you. So don't leave this room without really holding that in your heart and your mind. They need you because we absolutely need you.
Thank you. Catalina, I think we had one hand. Oh. I think we'll have to wrap after the next two.
Thanks so much. This is a question, I don't know if it has here's how we do it, an answer, but I would be interested to hear thoughts. Something I think a lot about is how do we go from these funding cohorts to long-term coalitions? And I'm hearing similar experiences maybe. I work for an org that is an admin staff of about 6. And so we're just trying to make our programming happen. And there's so many great opportunities to connect with other organizations, but they require someone to not be in the office doing the stuff that has to happen that day. And when I'm hearing the vision for progress in the world that we want to build together, I think it's a world that we build together. And so I'd love to hear thoughts on how do we get to that place where our organizations are running well enough that we have time to support each other more?
Excellent question. And I think, and please, as a matter of fact, would any of you like to speak to that, or Mariama, or how you all have evolved really from the smaller organization and growing, and what had to happen in order for that to happen?
I can start. So at Vibe, we love partnerships. We are often having almost too many conversations about what it looks like to share programming, because we are actively always seeking out mission-aligned, values-aligned partners in this space. And we know that because funding is so limited, right? And if we are approaching the work with a similar appreciation and a similar goal, that it's okay to share that resource and do that work together to then amplify each organization's mission and then also even reach more people. So that's how we do it.
And I would say that at the New York Women's Foundation, we are not only investing in the organizations, we've invested in additional resources so they can actually create spaces for them to get together with their peers. They've utilized our offices, money to just do strategic planning, the kinds of things that help you do the visioning work in addition to the rapid response work. I think that's always sort of the balance of negotiating, right? Like how to do the here and now and also build for the vision of the future, right? And that requires sustainability, right? So what does it look like to resource all of that? And I think in addition to just the dollars, what partnership has often looked like, what it always looks like at the New York Women's Foundation, is being in relationship with the foundation. So you have access to the full resources, program officers, our development team, our communications team. So you have thought partners. You also have access to all the other grantee partners, which I will have to say, 80% of the organizations that we have funded over the close to 40-year history are still in existence. They build with each other, and we just create spaces to do that. So I think there are a variety of ways that foundations and grantee partners and the community can create those spaces and build together. I think we have time for one more before we close with Anna's remarks.
Thank you. I just love that question. This is not a question. It is a reflection, a comment. I am representing Jaya, just as I am Youth Empowerment, new grantee for Phase 2, and I'm so excited and inspired to have heard each of your presentations and to be here this afternoon. It has been, I have not stopped writing. It's just, I want to thank you all so much, and I'm so excited about our next 7 years together.
Excellent. Thank you. And on that note, a round of applause for our panelists. Mariama, Simone, and Beryl, thank you so much. And now, Ana Oliveira, President and CEO of the New York Women's Foundation.
Okay, everybody. Can you hear me? I think this is working, right? Okay. I don't know about you, but this has been a glorious afternoon. And I was thinking that these days we talk about all the difficulties. It's important to recognize them. But I'm going to say that it's more important to recognize success and strength. Because when we are thirsty and we get a glass of water, what's going to quench our thirst is not the part of the glass that's empty, is the water that's in the glass. And that's about the strength. And this whole afternoon, it has been a conversation after another, a witnessing after another of what can be done when nobody thought it could be done. You don't know this, but in the genesis story of this, it was Joanne Smith in a conversation with me about her disappointment of her calls for investment in young women of color not being heard, that we talked about when some doors close, what are the others that we are going to open up? And my comment about that is that it's not about just the size. It's about the tipping point. We began this thing, this fund, this initiative when nobody, I tell you, we are a public foundation, so it keeps us a little more honest. What does that mean? We remember what it is to ask for money. We remember that gap that Melissa talked about, like you do. We live it too, so that keeps us more humble. It was very refreshing for me to go foundation after foundation and say, show me how you can meet your mission if you don't center and invest in young women of color. I don't care what it is. Education, mental health, criminal justice, social justice, democracy, whatever it is, it doesn't happen without that. And folks like Ford, incredible people said, yes, we will join you in this thing that nobody had done at that point. Funding tables, funding any age of women of color did not exist then. We're talking about, 10 years almost. You can go and Google all the other funds have been created since. That's our job, is to show what's possible. We wouldn't have been able to do that without you. Without you, first of all, our grantee partners that believed in us and took a chance in applying for a grant to work with us, you know? And you know, the idea of trust is a two-way street. It doesn't happen just because we wish it, right? So I want to thank you for giving us that way back before that, but also at the creation of the fund. And I've been a stickler for correct history. So the history of this existence is because of Joanne Smith. And I want to say that, and I will always say that. Melissa came on board. Danielle, bless you and your leadership and your incredible generosity came on board and made it possible. The women that came to City Hall, you know what it is to go to security in City Hall? Where they are not used to have young women of color, cis, trans, gender-expansive folk belong in that environment. You know what it is to sit in work groups when you're talking about incarceration and try to change the police, the probation, etc. Not easy. And folk did that for a whole year. So my gratitude is for everybody that, you know, you invite people and nobody shows. It doesn't matter. It matters when people show. So it matters the people that showed, that believed, that took the risks. And I want you to know that that's what made it. And it continues to make, with you in the panel, all of you sitting there, all the others that are not here today, and that's what continues to make it. So Camille referred that there are 16 other women's foundations that have young women's initiatives. And when we began this, there were 4 of us. And it was during President Obama's time that we were given the opportunity. If we could get, 5 or more women's foundations to commit to doing this, the First Lady, Michelle Obama, would give us some time in her national conference for the first time. And we did, of course we did, right? That was an easy lift compared to, and it was out of that centering young women of color in philanthropy became more fashionable. And I am choosing my word intentionally because you know that it is considered a fad. It is considered a temporary investment. Not at the New York Women's Foundation. Not then, not now, not ever. And that is because of who we are. And that is because of the purpose of this foundation. There is no purpose existing as an institution to give out $10 million. You know that many other institutions could give out $10 million, actually to women and girls, But it's not, it's the money and it's the how. And it's the purpose. And it's the choice of who receives the money. So that's why we exist. And that's why it's a sure bet. That trust is a mutual trust. You should. Philanthropy is uncharacteristically unaccountable. Philanthropy is uncharacteristically, doesn't report, doesn't account to anybody. You should hold us accountable. We are a New York public foundation. The idea that problems and solutions live in the same place means what Camille was talking about, those who live the experience at the center. It also means all of us in New York. And as Mariama said, operating in New York and investing in New York for the Ford Foundation. That kind of respect, that kind of solution. So I want to say a couple of things. Why do we think that this has been working in spite of all the disbelief? Listen, the New York Women's Foundation, we look good to you, but we are tiny in the world of philanthropy. So remember, for those of you who brilliantly lead organizations that might have a small budget, that might have a small number of staff members, it's not just size. It's what you do, as you just demonstrated in the panel before, and how you do it. It's really important that we each be aware of our added value. It's really important as individuals, as organizations, as changing people in the world. We rely on each other that way, So, yes, together action. That's what the fund is, together action. We can offer foundations a protection that sometimes they cannot take certain risks. You understand what I mean? Because if something, quote unquote, goes south, by the way, I'm from the South, so I love the South. Something goes south, meaning there's a little moment in real life, and foundations are not prepared to deal with real life. The New York Women's Foundation can step in and be a partner with them, okay? We are always looking for new partners, always looking for new partners. Success for us would be for this fund to be 10 times bigger. Success for us would be for every place in the United States and beyond, for a young woman of color to know that she belongs, that there is her resources on her terms whenever she wants, that there is not a question about belonging. There's not a question, as Mariama said, that resources are provided, not as an exception of philanthropy, but as a way of being in the states, in the cities, and in the countries. That's success for us. So we have a tagline at the foundation, which is radical generosity. But I have learned more and more over the years that it's actually radical gratitude that makes things go. So I want to express, and the GGE people, please get it to Joanne. I'll get it to her in my own texting, but get it to her. First and foremost, beginning with my radical gratitude to Joanne Smith. For her, for this brilliant, brilliant combination of vulnerability and determination, for a sense of what's possible and the discipline to march there and to do that with others. I want to thank Danielle for always, always, always responding to the calls, always partnering, always seeing that alone nobody does anything, and always being there. And with that, making it possible. Clearly, I want to thank Melissa Mark Viverito because she did something very unusual. You know where City Hall is? You know where City Council offices are on Broadway? They are across from each other. It was the City Council side of the street that responded to this. Catch my drift? And Melissa responded Not a coincidence that she responded for the first phase and Speaker Adams responds for the second phase. They are women of color in leadership in New York City. Yes. So with that, I want to say, please don't underestimate, although limited and although imperfect, the opportunities that we have to elect the people that represent us. Please don't underestimate that importance and each of our role in that. Sometimes we have the privilege of electing somebody like Adrienne Adams, voting for her. Sometimes we may have the duty to do what I call harm reduction. I want to leave you with that. We live in a very, very, very imperfect world. And it's important to be analytical, to be contextual, and to seize every opportunity to either move the needle or reduce harm. Okay? The opposite of healing justice is the reinfliction of harm. Okay? Just because things have happened in the past and are already terrible doesn't mean we want to feed them again to happen even in bigger ways. We should be very clear about that. And we should also be very clear that it really does matter. It really does matter what each one of us does. Be extending a partnership, as our speakers were speaking about before, be uniting, be refusing to be colonized. Melissa spoke about that. Colonizing paralyzes us. It creates apathy. It creates the sense that we don't matter. That is the first victory. I no longer matter, because that is the plan, as you well know. So if we internalize that, check the mark. The box is checked, you know? So remember, every time you feel that, let's call each other. Let's reach out. Because that's talk about a pandemic, you know? Talk about a contagious virus of powerlessness and we don't matter. Reach out. Reach out. Because we will remind each other that we actually do matter. I want to finish my thank yous to the terrific staff at the New York Women's Foundation. Yes. I am so delighted that 9 years later, I get to do thank yous, you know? That is a gift for me, to see you in the leadership of it. And Kim, I want to thank you for centering us. Yes. Yes. Centering us today, centering the work of the fund, being exactly the person that we need, leading our fund. So I want to thank you for joining the foundation, for doing that. I want to thank Gisela Marroquin, for providing the support and guidance to Kim. I want to thank Kim's colleagues, because I know you kind of move in a pack, and you're all there. And I want to thank Camille for your brilliant leadership. Yes, yes. No words you witnessed today. It's hard for me to try to describe it. It has been, it is, and I know you will be. So I want to thank you for that. I also want to thank the people that, you know, we talk about caring for each other. The people that care for us so that this can happen. And those are our, where's Beth and Tawana, our events people that make it happen. They are outside working. I want to thank our small but mighty PR and communications team, which is Devika and Brooke. Very small and mighty. I want to thank our folks in the strategic learning components that are doing, Catalina and Dana. I also want to thank our incredible board members that are here today. And if you wouldn't mind, so that they believe me that I'm not inventing that board members are here, could you just raise your hand for 1 second? All right. Thank you so much. Sometimes EDs, CEOs say these things, people think they're just, you know what I mean, advertising their board or whatever it is. But in my case, in our case, we follow our board. They are with us. And I want to thank our incredible photographer that is documenting this for us. And at the foundation, there are departments, there are roles, but it's a one world. So our development team has also been part of this. Madeline, Carrie Ann, Adriana, and Sharon, Jessica. I just have to see everybody here. So it takes a village, right? So the village is very strongly making it all happen. Most importantly, I want to thank you, every single one of you. They say that showing up is half of it, right? Showing up is half of it. But I think about what is showing up really, right? Is it just the body? I don't think so. In 12-step programs, they say, bring the body and the rest will follow. That is true. But the most important thing is that the rest follows, right? Is that we come back and we come back and we come back, and in that process of coming back, our wholeness comes with us. And our wholeness is really the gift that we give to each other. So I'm going to end by inviting you to fiercely commit to not let others say to you, it can't be done. It can, it is done every day, and it will continue to be done. And what is that it? It is our steps, our belief in ourselves, and our change towards this long road to justice. My last word to young folk than me. Anybody here probably is younger than me. I'm just going to say this. Kim began, and many of the speakers spoke about our ancestors and grounding ourselves in the strength, the roots, I'm going to say, the freedom that our ancestors always bring to us. So my reflection during this conversation today is, can we imagine ourselves as ancestors to others? What kind of ancestors are we imagining ourselves to be? So let's go forward together. I look forward to the next 7-10 years of this initiative. So it will not be an initiative. It will just be the way that it is in philanthropy. Thank you so much.